This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Support for this program comes from the Gail and Tom Benson Charitable Foundation, committed to funding educational causes.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, on August 6th, 1975, an NFL game was played in the newly opened Louisiana Superdome. It was a preseason match between the Houston Oilers and the Saints. The Oilers won 13-7, but in the bigger picture, New Orleans won, having built a bigger dome stadium than Houston had, and one that would be far more lasting. This week, we commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Superdome by looking at some of its founders, as well as historic events and how it compares to other major stadiums, as well as the impact that the building had on redrawing downtown development. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, and Jeff Duncan, sports columnist for NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, also sports analyst for WVUE Fox 8 Sports. Welcome to our table here, Jeff. Okay. We're going to go to you first because it's the 50th anniversary of the Louisiana Superdome, 50 years, and our dome's still there and just doing really well. So you kind of wanted to take a look at the history of it and the founders and what downtown looked like before the dome came on board?
Sure, yeah. You know, that reminds me, I think Jeff can verify that there were a lot of domes that were built after the Superdome was built, and they didn't last. Right. Like in Minneapolis and in Seattle, they built them on the cheap, okay, and they just didn't last. But ours lasted and grew, and so I think that was very impressive. But you know, as much as we like to tease Houston, and justifiably so, that there were two really. You look back at it, there are two major influences that Houston had in New Orleans, like going maybe from the '60s forward. One was the industry that New Orleans had the ports, but the ports weren't doing well, especially with containerized cargo. That the ports were moving out. There were fewer longshoreman jobs, but people looked at Houston where they were developing for an oil industry, and they were building big buildings, and because they saw the growth of the offshore oil industry, and that really influenced some of the thinking that would happen when they looked at Poydras, which was sort of like a back street to downtown. It was a truck route to get to the riverfront, but there wasn't much. And so there was this what to do with Poydras example, and like Mayor Vic Skiro was very big on that. But the other influence that Houston had was the idea of building a dome stadium. And that goes back to baseball, with Houston being awarded the baseball franchise. And baseball said, look, you can't play baseball in Houston during the summer. And so they said, well, we're going to build a dome stadium. And they built a model that everybody saw. And then once it was built, people started thinking about dome stadiums. There's a story that Governor McKitton was shown the plans of what Houston did, and he says, "Well, we're going to build one too. We're going to build one bigger, though, okay?" And so from the very beginning, and so I think that they influenced in those two aspects, but by doing that, okay, and so two things happened. I mean, beginning in the late '60s, one is building new buildings. One is building tall buildings, one is attracting the oil industry, and the oil industry came, and so you saw that. But the other was the idea of building a dome stadium, and a dome stadium that would be bigger and better and more lasting and multi-purpose, whereas the Astrodome was built to be a baseball stadium. The dome stadium was built to be a multi-purpose stadium, so they had a major influence.
Let's talk about those visionaries who had that vision of building this facility that would be long-lasting and multi-purpose, those founders that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and from the very beginning, I mean, I have a list of the key founders, and it's in no particular order except the first one. The first one belongs first on every list. That's Dave Dixon.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was a New Orleans businessman, and he was the guy, first of all, he had the vision. Well, a lot of people talked about, wouldn't it be nice to have an NFL team? And in New Orleans, but he went and pursued it. He met with Pete Rozelle, talked to him, and he says, he talked to Pete Rozelle and said, look, y'all can never get an NFL team in New Orleans until you get a dome stadium, because we can't have like football in September in New Orleans. And so he really pursued that. And so there were two things: one, getting the Saints franchise, and then two, doing the groundwork for getting the Superdome. And so he's really important to the product. Next on the list is Pete Rozelle, who was the NBA commissioner who made it happen. I mean, he could have said, no, we're not going to do it. We're not going to go to New Orleans. But Pete Rozelle was behind it.
The NFL commissioner, yeah.
Excuse me?
NFL.
Yeah.
Not NBA.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the NFL. A really, really important person was John McKithen, who was the governor. And McKithen could have really killed him politically. He was fascinating because he was from North Louisiana. He sounded kind of like a country bumpkin kind of guy. And the politics in Louisiana was that North Louisiana never really liked New Orleans. So he had to sell this idea to North Louisiana to support funding and building a dome stadium in New Orleans, which was really an unpopular idea.
Sell. Yeah.
But he did. He got behind it. It reminds me of Nixon going to China. It took a conservative Republican to convince the United States that it's okay to go to Red China at that time. And McKithen made it popular. And there was all kind of cost overruns that happened, and he stood by that. There's a statue of McKithen now, and he deserves it. Moon Landrieu, who during the process was on the council and then ultimately became mayor. But one thing that when the Dome Stadium was approved, they approved the Dome Stadium Commission, and he became like the executive director of the Dome Stadium Commission. And at first, there was some talk, maybe we should build it out in eastern New Orleans, because at that time, a lot of ballparks were being built, and they were being built out in the suburbs. They said, no, we got to build it downtown. He was really one of the big proponents of building it downtown in what was abandoned railroad property, and so he really made it happen, and that was part of that Poitras revival. And a guy named Buster Curtis, who's an architect, firm called Curtis and Davis, and he had a real vision of the style. It's called Barhouse Architect. Right. And whereas the Astrodome wasn't a pretty building, okay, and all the immediate dome stadiums, but there was really a lot of style to it. And so now in years to follow, there'd be more champions of the Dome Stadium like Tom Benson, but the guys who were there at the beginning were these people.
And of course, Arthur Davis also, with Buster Curtis, involved with the design and building of that Superdome.
Curtis and Davis were partners. Curtis was the guy who actually, did the pen on paper and design, and there was a little bit of tension between the two towards the end. Well, who was more responsible? But I think history is on Curtis's favor on this, even though Davis did great things too.
Right. Well, I mean, that's really a good background, reminding us of who was instrumental in getting that Superdome built and the place where it was built. That was really crucial. That was very important.
It was brilliant, and because it was abandoned railroad land, and that really did a lot to trigger what would happen on Poitras, and that was important. It kind of reminds me, when I look at these guys and I'm reading about them, it kind of reminds me of the writing of the Declaration of Independence, the great minds that came together in the same room at the same time. We really had some great minds that came together for all this to happen, because it was really a long-shot project.
Right. I mean, they knew how to do the design, the placement, the politics, getting the money for it, and made it happen. And like I said, the dome is still there, still functioning, looking good, and hosting thousands and thousands of people and events. So, comparing it to other stadiums, though, in around the country right now, how does this dome stand up?
Well, I'd say what Errol pointed to, the multiplicity of the complex is really what makes it special, along with the location. I mean, the genius behind the vision to put it downtown in one of the great destination cities in the world is really what has made that building so lasting and enduring and popular for pro sports events and major events of any kind. I would say, just being frank, it's not the nicest stadium I've been to. I would compare it to, say, SoFi, the new stadium in Los Angeles, which has hosted a Super Bowl already, is going to be in the rotation. Tottenham Hotspur in London, where the Saints played a couple years ago. Those modern stadiums are the finest in the world. And Doug Thornton, who manages the Superdome and manages stadiums all over the world, will tell you the same thing. But what makes the Superdome so special is its size, as Errol talked about. I mean, you could fit the Astrodome inside of the Superdome. So you have this giant building. I've got some numbers here, 27 stories tall, 300,000 tons, over 13.5 acres, and that's just on the footprint of the stadium itself, doesn't include the parking garages. 3,000 pilings that are 160 feet long, 10 inches in diameter to prop it up. You think about the engineering that was involved in making a structure of that size and putting it where they put it, as Errol pointed out. There was some early talk about putting it out the lakefront. It would not be the same. We would not be getting nearly as many major events. If you talk to people with the NFL, major sporting events around the world that come here, it's that golden triangle of the convention center, all the hotels that are down there, all the way down to Poydras, where the Superdome is, in the French Quarter. That triangle is 2.5 miles roughly.
And
so
walkability.
Yeah, it's walkable for everyone with all those 35,000 roughly hotel rooms that we have there. Just really makes a huge difference. We're going to the Super Bowl this year in San Francisco. All the events of the Super Bowl will be in downtown San Francisco. The game is in Santa Clara. It's an hour away. It's the same in Miami when the Saints won the Super Bowl. So I think the vision to put it down there and continuing to upgrade it, I mean, it is state of the art. And I thought it had its best foot forward for the Super Bowl this year. All the upgrades to the sound system, to the video display boards. It was off the charts how nice it was. And the NFL, I think, was not only extremely impressed, but wants to come back here a little quicker than we've seen in past years for another Super Bowl. I wouldn't be surprised if we get one around 2031, which will be a little quicker turnaround than what we've seen in recent years.
You know, a lot of the modern stadiums now have the movable roofs where you can open and close them. They didn't have that concept back when the dome was being built. And so if they were doing it today, they might. But even though I don't know what the need is to be able to open up the roof, but a lot of cities do that.
Yeah, and look, I think you could argue, I think very, very persuasively, that it's the greatest capital project in the history of the state of Louisiana. I mean, one of them certainly, and I think it's probably the most valuable asset we have in the city next to the French Quarter. And so the vision to do that at a time when America was just turning on to professional football and professional sports becoming very much more popular. I mean, boxing had kind of started to fade, horse racing in American culture, and football had just really kind of taken on in the late 60s and the early 70s. The timing was perfect for New Orleans, and you mentioned Dave Dixon. He was the visionary that saw that, and I think definitely deserves credit for having, knowing that this could be something huge for the city.
And I read something like the early Mayor Morrison, when they have a major league facility, but he was envisioning baseball.
Right.
And it was Dixon who told him, he says, football is the future. And so they really put the emphasis on it. And once the Astrodome was built, and people were able to apply to that.
Yeah, and John McKithen said, initially he said, we're going to build the greatest stadium that's ever been built. And I think you could argue that. I thought about it driving over here today. Listen to the athletes that have performed and competed in the building. Michael Jordan, Muhammad Ali in a boxing match. You've had Tom Brady, arguably 3 of the 5 greatest athletes in American history in 3 different sports in that building. I don't think there's any other building in the world that's had that many great athletes, in addition to all the entertainers and political figures that have been in there. It's just a unique legacy that this building has. And I think it goes back to the vision to make it multi-purpose. I mean, you have tractor pulls in there, Mardi Gras balls, just everything in there besides sports.
A little thing, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but as I understand, is that there were cost overruns, but they paid for it amazingly fast. Right? And so the arena was really built with Superdome bonds.
Right.
That a lot of the money from the Superdome being paid off was built, and so essentially the Superdome gave us the arena.
And the Superdome has given us so much. I mean, like you said, legacy, so many events that have been there in the Superdome, and other domes that were built around that time or other stadiums, they don't exist anymore, but the Superdome still does. And it certainly served as a real big catalyst for the development of Poydras as we know right now. Not to mention hosting all of the events, as you mentioned. And I know you have a list of some of the major events that were in the
Some
Superdome.
of the lists over the years, some of the major events, and look, that's all kind of stuff. That was, basketball all kind of championships and things. You just can't name all of them, but a few highlights that come to mind. And I asked Jeff to kind of embellish. There's a couple of big fights. Okay, I guess the most famous was in '78, and that was the Muhammad Ali Lyndon Spinks fight.
Yeah, and that was a rematch. was the first really major fight that we had here in New Orleans, a heavyweight championship fight, and it was at the end of Muhammad Ali's career. He ended up fighting a couple more times. That was his last really major fight. It was a huge crowd. I think it was over 70,000 there at the time, the largest crowd to watch a boxing match in America, and it was also nationally televised on ABC on like a weekend. You just don't see that anymore. So really points to the significance of that event.
And 2 years later, that was the Sugar Ray Leonard-Roberto Duran fight.
Yeah, and that's the famous no Moss fight where Roberto Duran, midway through the fight, basically said, no more, I can't keep going. Huge controversy over that. Two huge, high-level boxers put on this display. And that one, I think, was also nationally televised as well.
Now, not too many times that you're going to hear Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Leonard, and the Pope John Paul II, the same conversation. But that was in '87 when the Pope came to the Dome.
Right, and that was a huge event as well. And this, obviously, the great Catholic heritage we have here in New Orleans. And I'd like to see them try to get the Pope back, right?
Yeah.
Oh, don't we all? Yes.
If they play Chicago Bears or something, get them in. But the big story from that event is that the Pope came in the morning, late morning, that Tulane had a home game that night, and the Saints had a home game that next day, and they both won.
Wow.
So you had the Pope, Tulane, and LSU, and the Saints.
Coincidence, Errol? Coincidence? I don't think so.
No, I don't believe. Republican Convention, that was in 1988. That was when George Bush the Elder was nominated. And the famous quote that came out of this is, "Read my lips, no new taxes." That didn't go too far. But anyway, that's the only convention we've had in New Orleans, that one in '88. And kind of on the downer side, but I guess in 2005, the building was used as the shelter of last resort for Katrina. A lot of people were packed in there. A lot of problems there. I don't think it worked out quite as well, and now they've changed the rules so it wouldn't be used as a resort. But that year, at that time, those days, it may have saved a lot of lives.
Yeah, I actually have a story on that. I was the first reporter in the Dome after the occupation during Katrina. I got in with Doug Thornton and a photographer from our staff, and we went in with some remediation experts. We had to put on hazmat outfits, and I've never seen really the damage, the extensive damage like that building suffered. It was really remarkable that they were able to get the building built back. That's a credit to Kathleen Blanco, who's the governor at the time, who kind of fast-tracked the recovery, knowing that we needed to get the New Orleans Saints back here. And that became a symbol of the recovery from Katrina. They recognized this building as part of our skyline. Everyone drives by the Superdome.
Right.
If we can rebuild the Superdome, maybe we can rebuild the city.
That was a magical day, the day that the Dome opened and reopened. It was just a beautiful, beautiful day, and there was so much excitement downtown that day.
Bigger than football, right? Much bigger football.
Yes, much more meaningful.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Super Bowl 36 was important because that was the first Super Bowl, the first big event in the country after September the 11th, when the nation still wasn't fully believing in itself. And I remember the night before you had Navy jets flying all around town and all this, and there were blockades. But the Patriots won that game. So
and they changed the entire kind of marketing for that game, changed it to all patriotism after 9/11. That was the first major sporting event in America after the terrorist attacks, and it really changed the way you go to sporting events because of the security that was enhanced at that first major event. Now you don't go to any event where you don't have metal detectors and the security like we had at that game.
And I personally think this next one may be the biggest because of just the emotional impact. This was in 2006 when the Saints returned to the Dome after missing out a year because of Katrina. That big night, Paul Tagliabue, the NBA NFL commission, put it together. They played Atlanta. That amazing start with the block punt. It was just an amazing game. The Saints never turned back.
Yeah, Steve Gleason, of course, the hero. It's a stadium outside. A statue outside commemorating that event. And what I remember that night was the pregame musical act of U2, Green Day, all New Orleans entertainers involved, Trombone Shorty, Irma Thomas. Just a spectacular, emotional moment. And you have to give credit to the NFL for recognizing the importance of that game and putting it on Monday Night Football for a global audience, their biggest platform, to show New Orleans recovery and bringing in acts that basically are like Super Bowl-worthy musical acts for a regular season game. I think it's the biggest regular season game in the history of the NFL.
Oh, I think so too. Okay, 2010 conference championship games, Saints versus Minnesota. The winner goes to the Super Bowl, goes into overtime.
I'll never forget the anxiety in the dome from the Saints fans screaming that they thought they were going to miss out on that game, and then the release and relief once that field goal went through
There's the winning kick right there.
Yes, that was when Sean Payton told him to hit the fleur-de-lis behind the goalpost.
I always remember they had the group Queen and We Are the Champions at that moment. And the last thing on the list, even though it could go on, is in 2020 when LSU won the national championship in the Dome.
Yeah, and probably the greatest college football season in the history of the sport was punctuated with that game. Just a dominant run. I don't know if we'll ever see anything quite like that again. Fittingly, it happened here at home.
All of these wonderful sporting events, and as you said, there are so many other things that have happened in the Dome. Musical events, certainly something that's fairly recent, is Taylor Swift and the concerts that were there, and so many great artists over the many decades of the Superdome. But of course, the Superdome is the home of the New Orleans Saints, and so let's talk a little bit about how the Saints are looking this preseason.
Well, we're about a week and a half, 2 weeks into training camp. We've still got about 2 or 3 weeks to go. Still got preseason games to play. But I have to say early on, Marcia and Errol, I'm encouraged with what I've seen. You know, new head coach, Kellen Moore, is the youngest head coach in the NFL. He just turned 37. We have players on this team that are as old as Kellen Moore. So it's a little bit of a maiden voyage for him and his coaching staff. They're not from the area, so they're trying to learn the market and buy houses and all these things, yet try to put this football team together that really is coming off a very disappointing year, 5 wins a year ago, the worst season we've seen here in a couple decades. But I'm encouraged with the buy-in he's already fostered from the veteran players in particular on the team. DeMario Davis, Cam Jordan, some of the stars on the team have already fallen in line behind him. This is going to be a challenging year. I think we've talked about it before. It's a young team. They have unproven quarterbacks with the retirement of Derek Carr. Really suddenly kind of changed the whole complexion of the season. You now have Tyler Shuck, a rookie second-round draft pick, competing with Spencer Rattler, who was on the team a year ago. And I think that overshadows almost everything else right now because they just don't have any experience. We've been so used to veteran quarterbacks here, from Drew Brees to Jeff Blake, to Derek Carr, and even Jameis Winston. Now you have really a quarterback, whoever wins the competition, that's never won an NFL game in his career. It's a little daunting for his coaching staff right now.
So is it looking a little bit different? I think I read you had a great piece in the, today, I know, on NOLA.com and in the paper on what you're seeing, the good and the bad. But also I think you noted that the way that this new coach is approaching training and workouts, what is that looking like?
Yeah, that's a really good point. They brought in a new strength and conditioning coach because they had so many injuries, Marcia, last year. It really derailed the whole season. And they brought in someone that's a little more analytically driven, kind of looking at the science, the sports science behind some of the injuries. And they're really, it's the lightest practices I've ever seen. What I mean by that, it's not very much physical contact. They're short, maybe an hour and a half. I mean, I watched practices with Bobby Hebert, who played for Jim Mora back in the 80s. He said, Jeff, we used to have 3-a-day practices in the heat in Hammond, Louisiana. And it was all full padded practices. Those days are over. They're finding through science that that's really not conducive to maybe avoiding injuries long term. So I think that is winning over the players as well, the new strength and conditioning.
And something that came into the news this week is the tragic shootings in New York City, and the shooter had left a suicide note saying he had played football in high school, and as a result, his brain was impacted by that. So what has the NFL done to protect players?
Well, it's a huge point of emphasis. It's been that way for the last decade or so. Player safety, they've got all kinds of new helmets now in the game, much more advanced technology in the helmets with different materials, different padding, and it's had a positive impact on the game. I think I saw the stats from this past Super Bowl. Roger Goodell talked about it. They had 182 concussions in the league total last year. That's a 17% drop from the year before in 2023. Obviously, there's always going to be head injuries in this game. I think the ones they're trying to eliminate are the major concussive impacts that happen. The Saints have a player in particular, Chris Olave, who's suffered 6 concussions in his career going back to Ohio State, missed 9 games last year with multiple concussions, and he is now wearing what they call a guardian cap. And that's another device that's been implemented by the NFL, that it kind of a protective device on the outside of the helmets that most of the players are now wearing during practice to combat the repetitive head trauma that goes with butting your head all the time in practice. He's not going to wear it during the game, but I think these new helmets, the new technology, and the rules changes. You know, they've eliminated kickoffs, changed the way kickoffs are now enforced, with trying to eliminate these, fast collisions that have impacted so many players negatively.
It's hard to imagine what they go through in playing this game.
Yeah,
like you said, fast collisions, and just the shock the body takes.
Steve Gleason, who was obviously a great special teams player for the New Orleans Saints and a good friend of mine, said it was like a car wreck, every time he went down. And he said you always had to have your head on a swivel, and you also had to have the right mindset.
All right, we're going to wrap up this discussion. This has been great. Opportunity to talk about our wonderful Superdome 50 years, and also the Saints hopefully having a great season. But now we're going to look to some future stories. E.
Well, the New Orleans Gold announced this week that they were going to skip this upcoming season, and they said that they want to look for future opportunities, discuss with the league, and potential pathways forward, whatever that means. Doesn't sound really optimistic to me, but it's a fun thing, okay? I mean, I've been to a couple of them. I don't understand the game very much, but it's fun to watch, and I hope they come back. But they won't be back this season.
And there's been growing interest in this area too.
Right, in rugby, and now I think there's going to have to be a decision made to what they do with the Shrine on Airline and who becomes the major tenant out there.
Right. Okay, over to you, Jeff.
Well, I've got a great story. Let me make a sneak preview of my column this weekend. It's on the new Tulane quarterback. His name's Jake Retzlaff. And what makes this interesting, you all, is he is Jewish. He came via transfer from Brigham Young University, which obviously is a Mormon school.
Right.
But Jake Retzlaff has an opportunity to be the first Jewish quarterback at Tulane, potentially ever. I'm still looking it up, certainly since 1970. And if we know the historically high enrollment of the Jewish population at Tulane, it's almost 40%. So I think he can be a real cult hero here if things go well. And he's very highly regarded. Should be a fun story.
We wish him all the luck. All right, guys, great conversation. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Support for this program comes from the Gail and Tom Benson Charitable Foundation, committed to funding educational causes.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.